Victoria Sterling adjusted her Hermes blazer and stepped out of the black Bentley, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble steps of the towering glass building. 5 years ago, she'd left this place with nothing but a broken heart and empty bank account. Today she was returning as one of the most powerful women in the city. The security guard who used to ignore her now scrambled to open the doors. "Good morning, Miss Sterling. They're waiting for you in the executive boardroom. Have you ever walked back into a place that once broke you but this time you held all the power?" Victoria's red lipstick curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Some meetings were about business. Others were about justice. Today's meeting was about both. As the elevator climbed toward the top floor, she thought about the 4 most important people in her life. The ones who gave her strength every single day. The ones no one in this building knew existed. But before we continue, welcome to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where stories come alive and hearts connect. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our storytelling family. Now, let's get back to the story. Victoria Knight had met Alexander at a charity gala, where she was representing her family's struggling textile business, and he was the golden boy of the tech world. 28 years old and already worth hundreds of millions, Alexander Knight commanded every room he entered. But what captured Victoria's heart wasn't his wealth. It was the way he listened when she spoke about her dreams of sustainable fashion. How he asked thoughtful questions about her business plans. The way his dark eyes lit up when she challenged his assumptions about traditional industries. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jet dinners, weekend getaways to his vineyard in Napa, and late-night conversations about building empires together. Alexander didn't just want a trophy wife, he wanted a partner. Someone who understood ambition, who could match his drive with her own vision. "You're going to change the world," he'd whispered on their wedding night, holding her close in the master suite of their new Manhattan penthouse. "We're going to change it together." For 2 blissful years they did exactly that. Victoria modernized her family's textile company with Alexander's tech innovations, creating the first fully sustainable luxury fashion line. Alexander expanded Knight Industries globally, with Victoria's insights into international markets proving invaluable. They were featured on magazine covers as Power Couple of the Year. Business journals analyzed their perfect partnership model. Society pages documented their glamorous life, charity events, art gallery openings, weekend escapes to their Hamptons estate. Victoria loved being Mrs. Alexander Knight. She loved the way he'd call her in the middle of board meetings just to hear her voice. How he'd bring her coffee every morning, perfectly prepared with 2 sugars and a splash of vanilla cream. The way he'd trace her face with his fingers in the quiet moments before dawn, whispering about the family they'd build together. But perfection, Victoria learned, was fragile. Have you ever felt like you had everything you wanted only to watch it slip away piece by piece? If you've experienced that heartbreak, hit that like button. You're not alone in feeling like happiness can be temporary. The change started subtly. Alexander began working later, canceling their dinner plans more frequently. When she'd suggest weekend getaways, he'd remind her about crucial projects that needed his attention. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he'd say when she tried to discuss it. "Knight Industries isn't just a company, it's a legacy. Everything has to be perfect." Enter Melissa Rodriguez. 26, brilliant and devastatingly efficient, Melissa was hired as Alexander's executive assistant during Knight Industries' aggressive expansion phase. She had an MBA from Harvard, spoke 4 languages, and could anticipate Alexander's needs before he voiced them. "She's a game changer," Alexander told Victoria enthusiastically after Melissa's first week. "Finally, someone who gets it. Someone who understands what it takes to build something this big." Victoria tried to be supportive. After all, she understood ambition. She wanted Alexander to succeed. But watching Melissa seamlessly integrate into her husband's world felt like watching someone else slip into her life. Melissa worked 18-hour days alongside Alexander. She traveled with him to international meetings that Victoria used to attend. She knew his schedule better than Victoria did, his preferences, his goals, his fears about the company's future. "It's just business," Alexander assured Victoria when she gently mentioned feeling left out. "Melissa handles the operational stuff so I can focus on strategy. It's actually giving us more time together." But it wasn't giving them more time together. It was giving Alexander more time with someone who lived and breathed Knight Industries the way Victoria once had. The final blow came on their 3rd wedding anniversary. Victoria had planned a surprise dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date. She'd worn the emerald dress he'd bought her in Paris, the one he said made her eyes look like starlight. She waited for 2 hours. When Alexander finally answered his phone, his voice was distracted, distant. Victoria? God, I'm sorry. Melissa and I are still at the office working on the Singapore deal. This is too important to postpone. It's our anniversary, she said quietly. Pause. Then, right? Of course. Look, let's reschedule. This weekend, I promise. Melissa's got everything organized here, so I should be free. That night, lying alone in their king-sized bed, Victoria realized she'd become an inconvenience in her own marriage. Alexander wasn't choosing another woman over her. He was choosing a version of himself that didn't have room for her anymore. She had no idea that in just 6 months, Alexander would ask for a divorce so he could marry the woman who understood his vision better than his own wife ever could. And she had no idea that she was already carrying the 4 children who would change everything. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier while Victoria was having breakfast alone in their penthouse dining room. She stared at the thick legal envelope, her coffee growing cold in her hands. After 3 months of increasing distance, cancelled plans, and Alexander's growing obsession with Melissa's exceptional capabilities, Victoria had suspected this moment was coming. But seeing her name typed coldly on official documents, Victoria Knight versus Alexander Knight, petition for dissolution of marriage, still felt like a physical blow. Alexander didn't even have the courtesy to be present for the delivery. When he finally came home that evening, he found Victoria sitting in his study, the papers spread across his mahogany desk like evidence of a crime. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Alexander loosened his tie, looking every inch the powerful executive who'd just closed another multi-million-dollar deal. "I assume you've read through everything. My lawyers were very fair with the settlement." "Fair?" Victoria's voice remained steady, though her heart was breaking. "You're divorcing me, Alexander. After 3 years of marriage. And you think the problem is whether you're comfortable," running his hand through his dark hair. "Victoria, you're an incredible woman. You deserve someone who can give you the attention you need. The kind of marriage you want. I want the marriage we promised each other. The partnership we built. That's just it, we want different things now. You want dinner dates and weekend getaways. I need someone who understands that building an empire requires sacrifice." The words hit her like ice water. "Someone like Melissa?" Alexander's silence was answer enough. "You're leaving me for your secretary." It wasn't a question. "I'm leaving because we're no longer compatible. Melissa and I, we share the same vision. The same priorities. She doesn't see my work as competition for attention, she sees it as our shared mission. Have you ever watched the person you love explain why they're choosing someone else, as if your heartbreaking is just a minor inconvenience? If you felt that devastating rejection, you're not alone. Hit that like button." Victoria stood slowly, dignity intact despite the destruction happening around her. When what? When did you decide you loved her more than me?" Alexander looked away. "It's not about love, Victoria. It's about building something that lasts. Something bigger than just the two of us. Our marriage was supposed to be bigger than just the two of us. This conversation isn't productive." He moved toward his desk, already shifting into business mode. "My lawyers will contact yours about the timeline. I'd prefer to keep this as civilized as possible." Civilized? As if there was anything civilized about dismantling 3 years of promises, dreams, and shared hopes with nothing more than legal paperwork and cold efficiency. Victoria left that night, taking only her personal belongings and the shattered remains of her faith in forever. 2 weeks later, living in a modest apartment downtown while lawyers argued over asset division, Victoria woke up violently sick. At first she blamed stress. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Alexander's legal team was determined to paint her as a woman who'd married for money rather than love, despite her own successful business. Every day brought new humiliations, new ways her life was being dissected and dismissed. But when the nausea persisted for a week, accompanied by exhaustion that felt bone deep, a terrible possibility occurred to her. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. Victoria stared at the plastic stick, her hands trembling. Pregnant. After 3 years of trying unsuccessfully, after doctors telling them both that stress might be affecting her fertility, after Alexander had started making comments about, maybe it's not meant to be, now when their marriage was legally ending she was carrying his child. Or children, as she'd discover at her first ultrasound appointment. "Congratulations," Dr. Martinez said, smiling at Victoria's shocked face as she pointed to the screen. "You're having quadruplets. 4 healthy heartbeats, all developing beautifully. Quadruplets. For babies. Alexander's babies." Victoria drove home in a daze, ultrasound photos clutched in her shaking hands. For children who would never know their father. for children whose existence could change everything, or destroy what little remained of her dignity. That night, Victoria sat in her small apartment, staring at those grainy ultrasound images. 4 tiny figures floating in darkness, depending entirely on her for their survival. She thought about calling Alexander. Imagined his reaction. Would he see the pregnancy as an opportunity to do the right thing? Would he marry her out of obligation while still planning a life with Melissa? Would he demand custody arrangements that split their children between 2 homes, 2 lives, 2 different sets of priorities? Or worse, would he assume she was lying, using a pregnancy claim to complicate the divorce and secure a better settlement? The thought of Alexander questioning the paternity of their children, of reducing her pregnancy to another legal maneuver in their divorce, made her decision crystal clear. Some secrets were worth keeping. Some children were worth protecting, even from their own father. Victoria Sterling would raise these babies alone. She'd build a life that didn't depend on a man who'd already proven that love came second to ambition. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from someone who doesn't value what they have. If you believe in protecting your heart and your children above all else, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Alexander Knight had made his choice. Now Victoria would make hers. And she'd spend the next 5 years ensuring he never had the chance to hurt their children the way he'd hurt her. 5 years later, Victoria Sterling stood in the marble lobby of Sterling Enterprises, watching her 4 children race between the modern sculptures while her assistant tried unsuccessfully to corral them. "Mommy, can we see your office with the big windows?" asked Sophia, her oldest by 3 minutes, already showing signs of inheriting Victoria's business instincts. "After we drop you at Grandma's," Victoria replied, smoothing down Ethan's unruly dark hair that looked exactly like his father's, though he'd never know that. "I have an important meeting today." The quadruplets were her greatest triumph and her most challenging adventure. Sophia was the natural leader, always organizing her siblings into elaborate schemes. Ethan was the quiet thinker, solving puzzles that challenged children twice his age. The twins, Lucas and Maya, were pure energy, Lucas with his infectious laughter and Maya with her artistic soul that found beauty everywhere. None of them knew their father's name. As far as they were concerned, Daddy was a concept that belonged to other families, not theirs. Have you ever built a completely new life from scratch, proving that you're stronger than anyone ever believed? If you've ever had to be everything to your children, hit that like button. Single parents are true warriors. The transformation hadn't been easy. Those first months after the divorce were brutal. Mourning sickness with quadruplets while fighting for a fair settlement, launching her new company while her body struggled to accommodate 4 growing babies. But adversity had forged Victoria into something Alexander never could have imagined. The gentle wife who'd once waited hours for him to come home from work was gone, replaced by a woman who built corporate dynasties while changing diapers, who closed million-dollar deals while breastfeeding, who turned her pain into the driving force behind an empire. Sterling Enterprises started in a cramped studio apartment, with Victoria working 18-hour days while the babies slept. Her sustainable fashion line, born from the ashes of her family's textile business, caught the attention of environmental activists and luxury consumers alike. Unlike Alexander's cold efficiency, Victoria built her company on innovation with heart. She created jobs in underserved communities, pioneered eco-friendly manufacturing processes, and proved that conscious capitalism could be wildly profitable. The fashion industry took notice. Then came licensing deals with major retailers. International expansion. Diversification into sustainable technology, green energy, real estate. 5 years after leaving Alexander's penthouse with nothing but broken dreams, Victoria Sterling was worth more than her ex-husband. Tastes sweeter because you earned it through your own blood, sweat, and tears. That's when you know you've truly won. Subscribe and ring that notification bell if you believe the best revenge is massive success. Meanwhile, across the city in the penthouse that had once been their shared home, Alexander Knight was discovering that getting everything he thought he wanted came with an unexpected price. His marriage to Melissa had been a disaster from the wedding day. The woman who'd been the perfect assistant proved to be demanding, calculating, and utterly uninterested in anything that didn't directly benefit her ambitions. Their honeymoon lasted exactly as long as it took Melissa to realize that being Mrs. Alexander Knight meant sharing attention with a multi-billion-dollar company, and she'd expected to be his only priority. "You work more now than you did when you were married to that other woman," Melissa complained during one of their increasingly frequent fights. "At least she pretended to support your career." Alexander would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom he'd once shared with Victoria, wondering when his perfectly calculated life had started feeling so empty. Knight Industries was thriving financially, but the soul had gone out of it. Melissa's efficiency had eliminated the human element that Victoria had brought to his work. Deals closed, profits soared, but Alexander felt like he was managing a machine rather than building something meaningful. He never spoke Victoria's name aloud, but he thought about her constantly. How she'd light up when discussing sustainable business practices. The way she'd ask questions that made him think differently about corporate responsibility. Her laugh that could fill their entire penthouse with warmth. He tried to find her after the divorce was finalized, more to apologize than anything else, but Victoria Sterling had vanished completely. Her family's textile business had been sold, her friends claimed not to know her whereabouts, and even his private investigators came up empty. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist. The first crack in Alexander's foundation came when Knight Industries lost the Morrison account, a $50 million deal that should have been a guaranteed win. The client cited lack of authentic vision and corporate soullessness as reasons for choosing a competitor. The competitor was Sterling Enterprises. Alexander stared at the business cards scattered across his desk, reading the name Victoria Sterling, CO, with growing disbelief. It couldn't be his Victoria. Sterling was her maiden name, but surely it was coincidence. His gentle, idealistic ex-wife couldn't have built a company capable of competing with Knight Industries. Could she? A quick internet search shattered his assumptions. There she was in Forbes, Fortune, Business Weekly, his Victoria transformed into a powerhouse CEO whose company was being hailed as the future of conscious capitalism. She looked stunning in the professional photos. Confident, successful, radiating the kind of inner strength that came from surviving the impossible and emerging victorious. She also looked completely unreachable. Alexander spent hours reading articles about Sterling Enterprises, amazed by the innovative programs Victoria had implemented. Employee profit sharing that actually meant something. Environmental initiatives that had revolutionized manufacturing. Community outreach that created lasting change rather than just positive publicity. Everything he'd once claimed to value but had somehow lost sight of in his pursuit of pure profit. "She's making us look like corporate dinosaurs," Melissa said, reviewing the latest Sterling Enterprises press release about their carbon-neutral manufacturing facilities. "We need to figure out how to beat her at her own game." But Alexander wasn't thinking about beating Victoria. He was thinking about the woman he'd let slip away, who'd apparently built the kind of company he'd always dreamed of creating, with heart, vision, and authentic purpose. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form about why Victoria Sterling seemed so determined to destroy everything he'd built. Have you ever realized that the person you underestimated was actually the strongest one in the room? Sometimes we don't recognize greatness until it's standing on the opposite side of the battlefield. If this story is keeping you hooked, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional twists. The war between Knight Industries and Sterling Enterprises was about to begin. Alexander just didn't know yet that he'd already lost everything that mattered. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Victoria closed the acquisition proposal with a satisfying snap. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned to command respect through results rather than intimidation. "Knight Industries is hemorrhaging value. Their stock price has dropped 30% in the last quarter. Their biggest clients are jumping ship for companies with authentic vision." Victoria's CFO, Michael Chin, pulled up financial projections on the wall-mounted screens. "Their debt-to-equity ratio is approaching dangerous territory. They're vulnerable and they know it. The board is panicking," added Sarah Williams, Victoria's head of acquisitions. "Alexander Knight's marriage to his former assistant has been a PR nightmare. Their employee satisfaction ratings are at an all-time low. Even their shareholders are questioning his leadership." Victoria studied the numbers with the cold precision of someone who'd learned to separate emotion from business strategy. On paper, this was simply a smart acquisition, a struggling company with valuable assets, ripe for a hostile takeover by a stronger competitor. In her heart, this was justice. "What's our position?" Victoria asked. "We've quietly acquired 18% of Knight Industries stock over the past 6 months, Michael reported. "Combined with the pension funds and institutional investors who've agreed to back our bid, we'll have controlling interest within 48 hours of making our move." Victoria nodded, remembering those early days when Alexander's lawyers had painted her as a gold digger who deserved nothing from the divorce. When she'd left his penthouse with barely enough money to rent a studio apartment, while he'd kept every asset they'd built together. Now she was about to own everything he'd considered so much more important than their marriage. "Timeline?" she asked. "We go public with the acquisition announcement tomorrow morning. Knight Industries board will have 72 hours to respond to our offer. And if they refuse? Sarah smiled grimly. They can't afford to refuse. We're offering 30% above current market value. Their fiduciary duty to shareholders makes acceptance inevitable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything. Subscribe and ring that notification bell if you believe success is the sweetest form of justice. Across the city, Alexander Knight sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports that painted an increasingly bleak picture. Knight Industries was bleeding money, losing clients, and hemorrhaging talent to companies that offered better culture alongside had been the final nail in his reputation's coffin. Business journals that had once praised his strategic mind now questioned his judgment. How could a man who'd built a billion-dollar empire make such a catastrophic personal decision? The Morrison account was just the beginning, his VP of Operations warned during their crisis meeting. Sterling Enterprises is systematically targeting our biggest clients. They're offering better terms, better service, and somehow they're doing it at lower costs. Alexander rubbed his temples, fighting the migraine that had become his constant companion. How is that possible? Their overhead is lower. Employee turnover is almost zero. They've streamlined operations in ways that actually improve quality rather than just cutting costs. Everything Alexander had once valued, employee loyalty, sustainable practices, innovation over pure profit, Victoria had perfected. She'd built the company he'd dreamed of creating, while he'd focused on quarterly earnings and board approval. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Knight? Your wife called. She wants to know if you'll be home for dinner." Alexander almost laughed. Melissa had never cooked a meal in her life. Dinner meant reservations at whatever trendy restaurant would provide the best networking opportunities for her social media presence. "Tell her I'll be working late." The truth was, Alexander preferred his office to the cold marble mausoleum his penthouse had become. At least here, surrounded by the remnants of his empire, he could pretend he still controlled something. His computer chimed with an urgent email from his head of finance. Subject line, "Emergency market activity." Alexander opened the message and felt his blood turn to ice. Massive Knight Industries stock purchases throughout the day. Someone's making a play. This looks like the beginning of a hostile takeover. Need to meet ASAP. Within hours, Alexander's boardroom was filled with panicked executives, financial advisors, and legal counsel. The evidence was undeniable. Someone had been quietly acquiring Knight Industries stock for months, positioning themselves for a complete takeover. Who's behind this? Alexander demanded. His head of finance pulled up trading records. The purchases are coming through multiple investment firms, but they're all connected to one parent company. He paused, double-checking his information. Sterling Enterprises. The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Victoria. Sir? Nothing. Continue. But Alexander's mind was reeling. His ex-wife, the woman he'd discarded for being incompatible with his ambitions, was about to steal his life's work out from under him. The irony was devastating. He'd divorced Victoria because she allegedly didn't understand the pressures of building an empire. Now she was proving she understood those pressures better than he did. What are our options? Alexander asked. His legal counsel looked grim. Limited. Sterling Enterprises has been playing this perfectly, completely legal, strategically brilliant. If they have the backing they appear to have, we're looking at a successful hostile takeover. And if we refuse their offer? They'll go directly to shareholders. At current market prices, their offer will be too attractive to reject. Alexander stared out his office windows at the city where he'd once felt like a king. Now he was about to become a subject in Victoria's empire. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Alexander, we need to talk. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Sterling Enterprises boardroom. Come alone. Victoria Sterling was summoning him to her domain. The woman he'd once dismissed was now dictating terms. And Alexander Knight, who'd traded love for ambition, was about to discover what losing everything actually felt like. Alexander arrived at Sterling Enterprises 30 minutes early, partly from anxiety and partly from a desperate need to understand what his ex-wife had built in the space where his marriage used to be. The gleaming 40-story tower was everything Knight Industries wasn't. Modern but warm, innovative yet grounded in human values. The lobby featured living walls of sustainable plants, charging stations powered by solar energy, and a coffee bar staffed by employees who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Everything Alexander had lost sight of in his pursuit of cold efficiency. Needing caffeine before facing Victoria, He walked to the small park across the street where food trucks served Sterling Enterprises employees. The atmosphere was relaxed, collaborative. People actually seemed to enjoy their work environment. It was there, ordering coffee from a truck specializing in fair trade beverages, that Alexander's world tilted off its axis. "Mommy said we could have hot chocolate if we're good during Grandma's visit," a small voice said behind him. Alexander turned and found himself looking down at 4 of the most beautiful children he'd ever seen. 2 boys and 2 girls, approximately 4 or 5 years old, all holding hands in a careful chain while an elderly woman counted heads. 1, 2, 3, 4, the woman murmured. All accounted for. "Now what did Mommy say about staying together?" "Stay close, hold hands and don't talk to strangers," the children recited in unison, their voices creating a perfect chorus. Alexander's breath caught. There was something familiar about them, the way the dark-haired boy tilted his head when thinking, exactly like Alexander did during board meetings. How the little girl with the artistic eyes studied the food truck's colorful menu with intense concentration. "Grandma Rose, can we get cookies too?" asked one of the girls, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. Green eyes. The exact shade of Victoria's eyes. "We'll see what Mommy says when she picks you up," the elderly woman replied fondly. She should be done with her big meeting soon. Alexander's coffee cup slipped from his numb fingers, hitting the ground and splattering hot liquid across his expensive shoes. The elderly woman looked over with concern. "Oh my, are you all right, dear?" But Alexander couldn't respond. He was staring at the 4 children with growing horror and recognition. The boy's dark hair and serious expression. The artistic girl's delicate features and Victoria's smile. The way they all moved with an unconscious elegance that reminded him of Victoria, of himself, of a genetic combination that could only mean one thing. "How old are they?" he asked hoarsely. "Just turned 5 last month," Grandma Rose said proudly. "Quadruplets. Can you imagine?" Victoria was such a trooper during that pregnancy. 5 years old. Born approximately 5 years ago. Alexander's mind raced through calculations, remembering the timeline of his divorce. Victoria had left in March. These children would have been born in late fall or winter, which meant they were conceived right before Victoria disappeared from his life. When you realize you've been living a lie for 5 years, how do you breathe through that devastating revelation? Hit that like button if you've ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew. "Their mother works in that building?" Alexander managed to ask, pointing towards Sterling Enterprises. "Oh yes, she's the CEO. Victoria Sterling. Such an accomplished young woman, raising these 4 angels all by herself." Grandma Rose's voice carried a note of protective pride. "She's made quite a life for them all. Victoria Sterling." Alexander felt like he was drowning while standing on solid ground. These weren't just any children, they were his children. His and Victoria's children, conceived during those last passionate weeks of their marriage when they'd been desperately trying to reconnect. While he'd been planning to divorce her for another woman, Victoria had been carrying his babies. "Daddy would have liked hot chocolate too," one of the boys said wistfully to his siblings. "We don't have a daddy, remember?" the artistic girl replied matter-of-factly. "Mommy says some families are different and ours is perfect just the way it is." The words hit Alexander like physical blows. His children, believed they didn't have a father. Victoria had raised them for 5 years without ever telling them about him. Without ever telling him about them. "Sophia, don't run ahead," Grandma Rose called as one of the girls started toward the crosswalk. Sophia. Victoria had named their daughter Sophia. Alexander watched in stunned silence as the small family group crossed the street toward Sterling Enterprises. His children. Victoria's children. The family he'd never known existed, living their lives just blocks away from his office. For 5 years, while he'd been building a cold empire with a woman he didn't love, Victoria had been raising their babies alone. Midnight feedings, first words, first steps, birthdays, bedtime stories, he'd missed everything. And she'd let him miss it all. The fury that rose in Alexander's chest was white-hot and all-consuming. Victoria hadn't just hidden his children from him, she'd stolen 5 years of fatherhood. 5 years of moments he could never get back. But beneath the anger was something even more devastating. The crushing realization that Victoria had been right to hide them. What kind of father would he have been 5 years ago? The man who'd chosen ambition over love, who'd traded his wife for a more compatible partner, who'd valued efficiency over emotion. Victoria had protected their children from that man. The question now was whether Alexander Knight was capable of becoming the father they deserved, or if it was already too late. His meeting with Victoria was in 10 minutes. And now he knew exactly what they needed to discuss. Everything. Alexander walked into the Sterling Enterprises boardroom like a man possessed, his usual composure completely shattered. Victoria sat at the head of a gleaming conference table, surrounded by financial documents and acquisition papers, looking every inch the powerful CEO she'd become. She was even more beautiful than he remembered. Success had given her a confidence that made her absolutely radiant. But Alexander wasn't here to admire what he'd lost. He was here for answers. "Hello, Alexander," Victoria said calmly, not looking up from her papers. "Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss about Knight Industries." "Forget the company." Alexander's voice was raw, barely controlled. "I saw them, Victoria. I saw our children." Victoria's pen froze mid-signature. For the first time since he'd entered the room, she looked directly at him, and Alexander saw a flash of pure panic cross her features before her professional mask slammed back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about." "4 children. Quadruplets. 5 years old." Alexander moved closer to the table, his hands braced against the polished surface. "Dark hair like mine. Green eyes like yours. Don't you dare lie to me." Victoria's carefully constructed composure began to crack. "Alexander. Sophia, Ethan, Lucas and Maya," he continued relentlessly. "Those are their names, aren't they? You named our daughter after my grandmother. You gave our son my father's middle name. You wanted me to know, didn't you? Some part of you wanted me to figure it out." Victoria stood slowly, her professional facade finally dissolving. "Stop. 5 years, Victoria. 5 years of bedtime stories, first words, birthday parties. You stole all of it from me. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I've done?" Victoria's voice rose, anger finally breaking through. "What I've done is protect them from a man who threw away his family for his secretary. What I've done is make sure they never felt the kind of rejection and abandonment that you put me through." The words hung between them like a slap. "You were pregnant," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "When you left, when you wrote that note about needing space, you were carrying my children and you said nothing. Because you'd already made your choice." Victoria's composure completely shattered. "You chose Melissa over me. You chose your precious empire over our marriage. What was I supposed to do? Beg the man who'd already rejected me to please accept his unwanted children too?" Alexander recoiled as if she'd struck him. "Unwanted? Do you think I wouldn't have wanted them? I think you would have seen them as an obligation. Another responsibility to manage efficiently. You would have married me back out of duty while still being in love with someone else, and our children would have grown up in a house where their father resented their existence. When the person you love believes you would have chosen duty over genuine love, how do you prove them wrong 5 years too late? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our past actions speak louder than our current words." That's not true. But even as Alexander said it, he wondered if it was. 5 years ago, would he have seen the pregnancy as an inconvenience? A complication to his carefully planned new life with Melissa? Isn't it? Victoria's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for years. "You told me I didn't understand the pressures of building an empire. You said Melissa shared your vision in ways I never could. You made me feel like I was holding you back from greatness." "I was an idiot. I was." "You were exactly who you chose to be," Victoria interrupted. "And I made sure our children never had to wonder why they weren't enough for their father to stay." The truth in her words cut deeper than any accusation. Alexander had been so focused on what he'd lost that he'd never considered what his children had been spared. "They don't even know I exist," he whispered. "They know they're loved unconditionally. They know their worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses to stay or leave. They know they're enough exactly as they are." Victoria wiped her eyes, trying to regain control. "I gave them what you never gave me, the security of being someone's first choice." Alexander sank into a chair, the weight of 5 lost years crushing down on him. "I searched for you. For months, I hired investigators, called in favors. I wanted to apologize, to explain." "To explain what?" "That you were sorry for choosing someone else but you were still going to choose them." Victoria's voice was quiet now, exhausted. "Alexander, by the time you realized you'd made a mistake, I was already building a life that didn't depend on whether you wanted us back." "And now?" "What about now?" Victoria gestured to the acquisition papers scattered across the table. "Now I'm about to own everything you thought was more important than our marriage. Your company, your legacy, your precious empire, it's all going to belong to the woman you threw away." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the successful CEO who was destroying his life's work, But the mother who'd raised his children alone while building something extraordinary, he realized suddenly. You're worth more than Knight Industries now. This isn't about profit. No, Victoria admitted quietly. It's about proving that the woman you discarded was stronger than the empire you chose over her. It's about showing our children that their mother didn't just survive being abandoned, she thrived. When success becomes your way of proving your worth to someone who never deserved you in the first place, are you healing or just hiding the pain? If this emotional confrontation is hitting you hard, show some love by liking this video. Alexander stared at the woman he'd lost, brilliant, fierce, protective, everything he'd been too blind to appreciate when he had her. I want to meet them, he said finally. I want to know my children. Victoria's expression hardened. They don't need a part-time father who shows up when it's convenient. They need their father, Alexander interrupted. Not the man I was 5 years ago. The man I could be now. The man you've helped me become by showing me what real strength looks like. For a long moment, Victoria said nothing, studying his face with the intensity of someone trying to see through years of hurt to the truth beneath. Prove it, she said finally. Prove you're the father they deserve. Prove you've changed. Prove that this time will be your first choice. Alexander Knight looked at the woman who'd built an empire while raising his children, and realized he was about to fight the most important battle of his life. Not for his company. Not for his pride. For his family. 3 months later, Victoria watched through her office window as Alexander sat in the Sterling Enterprises children's playroom, patiently helping Maya with her art project while the boys built an elaborate tower with blocks. He'd kept his word about proving himself. Every day for 12 weeks, Alexander had shown up, not as the demanding CEO who expected the world to revolve around his schedule, but as a man learning to revolve around 4 small people who didn't care about his board meetings or stock prices. Daddy Alex, look. Sophia called out, showing him her latest creation, a family drawing with 5 stick figures holding hands. Victoria's heart clenched. The children had taken to calling him Daddy Alex after their first meeting, when Alexander had sat on the floor of her living room and simply said, I'm sorry I missed the first 5 years. Can you help me catch up? That's beautiful, sweetheart, Alexander said, his voice soft with wonder that hadn't faded despite months of bedtime stories and playground visits. Tell me about everyone in the picture. That's me and Ethan and Lucas and Maya, Sophia pointed to each figure. And that's you and Mommy. We're all together because that's how families should be. Victoria turned away from the window, unable to watch anymore. Alexander hadn't just proven he could be a good father, he'd proven he was the father their children deserved. Patient, present, completely devoted to learning who they were as individuals. But being a good father didn't automatically make him trustworthy as a partner. Victoria had spent 5 years building walls around her heart, and watching them crumble felt terrifying. Her assistant knocked softly. Miss Sterling? Mr. Knight is here for your meeting. Victoria took a deep breath. Today was decision day, not just about the Knight Industries acquisition but about everything that came after. Alexander entered her office looking different than he had 3 months ago. Less polished, more human. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, clothes that could survive playground adventures and art projects. The board expects an answer today, he said without preamble. Victoria nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Sit down, Alexander. He remained standing. Before you decide anything about the company, I need to say something. Alexander. 5 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I traded the woman I loved for someone I thought would make my life easier. I chose ambition over heart, efficiency over soul. His voice was steady but his eyes held years of regret. I can't change that. I can't give you back the pregnancy I should have shared, or the years I should have been there for our children. Victoria's throat tightened, but she remained silent. But I can promise you this, Alexander continued. If you give me another chance, not as the man I was, but as the man I'm becoming, I will spend every day proving that you and our children are the only empire that matters to me. Victoria stood, moving to the window where she could see their children still playing in the room below. Do you know what the hardest part was? She asked quietly. It wasn't raising 4 babies alone or building this company from nothing, or even hiding my pregnancy from you. What was it? It was explaining to our children why some families have daddies and ours didn't. Maya asked me once if it was because she wasn't good enough to keep a daddy. Do you have any idea how that felt? Alexander's face went pale. Victoria? I never told them you left us, she continued. I told them their daddy lived far away and couldn't visit. I let them believe in fairy tales about a father who loved them from a distance rather than tell them the truth, that their father chose someone else over their existence. The words hung between them like a bridge Victoria had built from her own pain. I spent 5 years making sure they never felt unwanted, she said, turning to face him. And in 3 months you've made them feel more valued than I ever felt in our marriage. Alexander stepped closer. Victoria, I'm not finished. She held up her hand. I built Sterling Enterprises to prove I didn't need you. I targeted your company to prove I was stronger than the woman you left. But watching you with our children, I realized I was still fighting a man who doesn't exist anymore. Victoria picked up the acquisition contract from her desk, then walked to her office shredder. What are you doing? Alexander asked, stunned. Choosing forgiveness over revenge. She fed the papers into the machine, watching 5 years of carefully planned vengeance disappear. Choosing the future over the past. Sometimes the most powerful victory is knowing when to stop fighting. If you believe forgiveness is stronger than revenge, show some love by liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs to see this message. Alexander stared at her in amazement. You're not buying Knight Industries? No. But I am proposing a merger. Victoria smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she'd given him in 5 years. Sterling Knight Enterprises. Equal partners. Equal shareholders. Equal say in every decision that affects our family and our companies. A merger? Of everything. Our businesses, our lives, our future. Victoria stepped closer to him. But only if you're sure this time. Only if you're choosing us, not because it's convenient or profitable or logical, but because we're your first choice. Always. Alexander dropped to one knee right there in her CO office, pulling out a simple platinum ring, not the enormous diamond he'd given her the first time, but something elegant, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You built an empire while raising our children. You turned pain into power, loss into strength. You're the most incredible woman I've ever known, and I was too stupid to see it when I had you. Tears streamed down Victoria's face as he continued. I'm not asking you to marry the man who hurt you. I'm asking you to marry the man you helped me become. Will you give us a second chance? Through the office window, 4 little faces were pressed against the glass, watching with wide eyes as their parents finally found their way back to each other. Yes, Victoria whispered. Yes to the merger. Yes to the partnership. Yes to our family. When love survives the ultimate test and comes back stronger than ever, that's when you know it's meant to last forever. If this love story moved your heart, smash that like button, subscribe for more emotional journeys about second chances and true love, and share this with someone who believes that sometimes the greatest love stories are about finding your way back home. And as Alexander slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger, 4 little voices cheered from the playroom window, celebrating the moment their family finally became complete. Some empires are built from stone and steel. The best ones are built from love, forgiveness, and the courage to choose each other every single day. Thank you for watching.